Awesome. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a very exciting conversation planned. At the Circle, we believe that children can change the world, and we believe schools should prepare them not just to succeed, but to think deeply, speak up, and act for justice. When schools and learning spaces center identity, power, and justice, we believe that they become sites of action and sites of social repair. At the Circle, we are reinventing schools, after schools, and teacher training institutions that empower children from low income communities to build an India that is free of poverty and filled with love. We do this through our 2 year incubation program, where we work with entrepreneurs who want to build innovative, reimagined, reinvented schools and after school learning spaces. We also do this through the Circle Labs, which is something that I closely work with, where we host short-term capacity building programs for educators, school leaders. We also facilitate virtual immersions to schools across the globe. We give out innovation grants for people to try out micro innovations in their communities, and we also host thought-provoking conversations, just like the one that you're about to hear in a bit. All that said, we deeply believe that if we want to reimagine India's future, we need to reimagine its schools and learning spaces, especially where young people are most unheard and overlooked. That's why this conversation matters today. We're here to explore what a social justice curriculum in India could look like, a country where education just cannot be about academics. It needs to be about equity, awareness, and of course, action. Just to open up the theme for you today, we mentioned, for those of you who've seen the creative going around, we talked about raising change makers. Simply what that means for us is that to raise change makers, we need to believe that they are already here. Our role is to nurture them and sometimes just get out of their way. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to hear from two very passionate people who run two very incredible organizations that are setting examples for what does it mean to raise and work with changemakers. We have Vandita with us. Vandita is the founder of One Future Collective, a lawyer, a social scientist, and an activist who has spent the past decade building people-powered movements. One Future Collective works with young people and communities to build leadership for justice. They combine grassroots support like legal aid and mental health care with policy and education work. Thank you for joining us, Vandita. And we also have with us Nandini Kochar. She's a documentary filmmaker, educator, and a circle entrepreneur. Nandini is building Nazaria Arts Collective that runs creative community media-based programs for young people in low-income areas. From classrooms to rural villages, Nazaria is doing some amazing work in really building up the youth of India to become powerful storytellers who use media to raise their voices and hopefully change the world. You'll hear more about their work from them directly. The flow of our time today is going to be hearing about the work that Nandini and Vandita are doing at Nazaria and One Future Collective, respectively. They're going to be sharing some student impact with us as well, and this will give us a chance to really get a feel of what they are doing on ground. And then we're going to host a small conversation around what does it mean to actually have a social justice curriculum, what goes into the making of it, why are we having this conversation right now, and why it is important. And then we'll also open up for audience Q&A sooner than later. So hopefully you get to also ask questions. Just going to hand this over to Nandini. Again, the both of you, thank you so much for being here, and for the rest of you to join us as well.
Nandini, you're on mute. Sorry.
Closer. Yeah, I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope my echo has gotten better because I had to change location 3 times to hopefully have you hear me clearly. But yeah, thank you so much, Amina, for such a wonderful introduction. And good evening, everyone. It is such a privilege to be sharing space here with Vandita. I've admired One Future Collective's work for a long time. And so it means a lot to be in conversation with an activist and just a powerhouse like Vandita. I think what makes this conversation especially interesting is that social justice is at the heart of what both Nazaria and One Future Collectives work, and also we approach this work through various different lenses and models, which also I think underscores the fact that there are many and they must be varied ways in which we address something as massive and as important as social justice. I think in the world we're living in today, it becomes less of this additional thing that we add to our work in, community work or in education, and rather something that I think today has become more and more of a necessity. So I hope this conversation, inspires all of you in the room. And I want to just quickly, just to get a sense of who's in the room, ask a couple of questions, if you don't mind, just like typing quickly in the chat, like, who are you? Like, are you an educator? Are you just curious about, the work of social justice? Would love just in one or two words, if you could kind of just type in the chat box, yeah, what you do and what has potentially brought you into this conversation. So I'm just going to hold like a minute for that. I think that'll really help Vandita and I also just understand, who we're speaking to and who we're speaking with. Amazing. So we have a psychologist, a lawyer, educator. That's Vandita. Communicator, lovely, incredible. So lots of folks in the space of education, also folks who are working around critical areas like disability and inclusion. Okay, fantastic. So I think everyone here, or most folks here, are already in the education sector, deeply care about education. And I hope that this conversation kind of nudges us all to think about how can we bring social justice into our work in education if we don't already. All right, so I would actually love to pass this over to Vandita to share more about One Future Collective's work, give us some examples of what that looks like in action. I think, yeah, it'll be a great way to start this conversation.
Thanks, Nandini. I'm just so happy to be here. I think, so I started One Future Collective when I was 23, and I felt like, oh, I was the only one doing this, and I was going to do things differently. And today I'm like 30, and I'm so happy that I'm not the only one doing this. Once I started, I learned that there are hundreds of others doing this, and I've had the opportunity and the honor of getting to learn, be educated, change things, and just do better because of so many organizations, people, activists that have come before me and that continue to be here, especially including you and the circle. So I'm really happy to be here. Even the way today's conversation started with Amina talking about social repair is such a important aspect of social justice education, but it's often not highlighted. And also, Nandini, the way you spoke about the power of children in doing social justice work and really centering them, that's what I've seen in your work. That's really important for me. So it's I'm very happy to be in this space. It really feels like home. And that's not something I'd say easily. Yeah, okay. So that's just me feeling really good today. But let me start a little bit about like, what do we do? That's going to be a little complex, and then I'm going to make it more real. OFC started with a really simple idea, One Future Collective. It started with the idea that do young people have a political home? You have a social home, you have an educational institution, you have multiple spaces, right? But where do you go with your politics? And where do you go when you want to do something about your politics, when you want to discover your politics, and when you want to start taking action on it, right? That's where it started. Over time, we realized that a lot of young people would come back to us and say, look, you've made it worse for us because now we're so aware, we know what to do, but we keep going back to institutions that either don't care or actively prevent us from doing something, including their families, their educational institutions, governments, like every institute that they perhaps interacted with. And that's where today OFC's theory of change lies, right? It lies at the intersection of catalyzing people power and just institutions, with the belief that our role is to be that of a catalyst. We enable people to take action. We strongly believe we do not give anybody a voice. People have a voice. We work with them to remove the barriers that do not allow them to access or use their voice, right? Be it by providing mental health services, legal access to justice, or just in general working with institutions to make the institutions more just and fair so that people power can emerge and be real. So that's the more like, theory of change stuff, which I think everyone from the nonprofit sector knows we have to do also. But that's what we do, like in the broader sense. When it comes to social justice education, we've had a lot of learnings along the way. So I want to talk about 2, 3 learnings that have shaped our approach today. I think when we started, and I'll share a little, I had a script, but now let me share a story before I get to the notes I have. When I was like 18, 19, I used to run a community-based program in a slum community in Mumbai. And we used to work with the YMCA and YWCA there to do a lot of education work. So after school programs, that sort of thing. And I was one of the people teaching as well as leading the program. And I remember, one of those days I don't feel like teaching and nobody feels like studying. And I remember just asking the class, okay, so what do you want to be when you grow up? And this is like 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. And everyone's giving me answers that, they think will make me happy. So someone's saying, oh, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. And then this kid who I so really loved, like he was one of my favorites, although perhaps you're not supposed to have favorites. He gets up and says, we're saying this to make you happy. कि हम आपको ये सब, दीदी आप हमें पसंद हो इसलिए हम आपको खुश करने के लिए ये सब बोल रहे हैं. बट इस बस्ती में से कोई ड्राइवर या मैकेनिक भी बन गया तो बहुत बड़ी बात है. So we're saying this to make you happy, but if someone even becomes a driver or mechanic here, it's a big thing. So I had 2 like strong, I would say, reflections that day. As someone who had gone through periods of poverty in my life, I still had no understanding of dignity of labor. Because the moment someone said, I want to be a driver or mechanic, or maybe that's their aspiration, I was like, why? How could someone aspire to be that? Why would they want to be that? That was one. Second, with this very naive belief that if I taught kids English and math and physics and bio, they would get the jobs that they dreamt of. They would become doctors and teachers and lawyers, and they would not. And that's the day the importance of social justice, both as an element of education and as a process that education must facilitate, became very real for me. And which is where my work today lies, right? So I'll talk a little bit now about my work. We started doing social justice education or human rights education in a broader sense. One Future Collective invests in political education and leadership development under the aegis of social justice education. Here we have multiple formats, and I think maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more. We aim for this education to be contextual. We aim for this education to reach a person at where they're at, right? Like, do they want to explore? Do they want to learn? Do they want to take action? And a big focus of our work is, as much as we work with those who are facing oppression, we work with those who are the oppressors. So be it an institution that is causing the oppression, be it students in a classroom that are enabling the oppression, we work with those people as well. One such program that we run is the One Future Fellowship. Maybe I can share my screen, take you through 2 photos perhaps of this. So one of our programs today is the One Future Fellowship. It's a feminist and social justice leadership program, because as we worked more, and this program targets urban, queer, women, trans folks. We started with India and now we do South Asia. We realized that there were lots of barriers that we were creating, right? These are people with the ability to lead change and not just be beneficiaries of change. But even we went in, and I went in with the mindset saying, how do we build their voice? They have a voice. A lot of us need to get out of the way. I think Amina started with that as well, right? Saying sometimes we just need to get out of the way of our children. So that's the One Future Fellowship. Then is like a 6 months, 1-year program where we work with urban cured women across South Asia and do 4 things. We invest very deeply in their knowledge and skill base. Because the understanding that you need to have the tools, you need to have the theory to be able to take action. Second, we make this action real. A lot of times when social justice is relegated to theory, it does not move a person from awareness to action. And the action element does a lot of the will building part, which continues after the program. Third and fourth, which I think are the most important parts of our program. Sorry, I keep going, but I will get there in a bit. The third is coaching. A lot of the young leaders we work with, and they range from like 16 and upwards, right? They have never had a mentor. They've had nobody to talk to think with, who's had similar life experiences. Like we've had a fellow who's never been able to get a house because they're Muslim. right? We've had fellows whose parents are extremely low income. Now, in that situation, what is their priority? Is it livelihood or is it social change? Should the coaching advice be, oh, you should do social change work, or should it be, if you're interested in being an engineer, do that and then volunteer, right? Like things like that. And then the last part of it is building social capitals, networks, and access, and democratizing that space so that people from most marginalized communities as well can access the opportunities that they need. And there's been a lot of impact of the program. We've had, I'm not going into the numbers, but we have over like 140 fellows now. And this is just one of our social justice education and leadership programs. And it's so beautiful because we have a fellow in Pakistan who, after the program, has been able to change how girls play football in a remote area of Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, which is the Chitral region of Pakistan, right? In another case, we have a psychologist from Nepal who's able to further decolonizing mental health and really work with what mental health means in low income ghost towns of Nepal, where rates of suicide are extremely high because young people do not want to stay there anymore because there's no livelihood. Then we have someone like Mahapara from Bangladesh who's gone on to make legal aid so much more accessible for survivors, right? And to make it feminist and trauma informed. Then we have like, I mean, I'm taking the names on the screen, but there are so many others. We have Amara, who was critical in shaping economic policy when the government changed in the country. She was critical in contributing to that policy. At the same time, we have someone like an Aparupa from India who's taken the fellowship and said, okay, how do I make the knowledge I did not have more accessible to a wider audience? So it's also different forms of taking action ahead, identifying their communities differently, and being able to do different things with their community. I made a conscious choice today to not add one fellow story because a big part of our fellowship is that leadership is not individual. I think for too long, the sector and social justice education has focused on this one person who will liberate you and emancipate you. But that is not the core tenet of social justice. Social justice relies upon the belief that we have the power within us to liberate ourselves and that we need people with us to be able to fight for change collectively. So I will be honest, there are slides which talk about individual fellow stories right after the one I showed you. And I said, we need to stop doing this when that's not what we believe. We build communities of leadership. And I've given this example, but let me maybe just share a link in chat. This is one such program. We've run other programs for different age groups. So for example, there's another program we run on social justice, which we run with people, say about 12 to 13 years of age to 16. So like the 7th to 10th standard bracket. And these we run within schools. The example I'm sharing in chat, it led to such a transformation in that school where it actually eradicated the communal violence. And Navalgarh is a fairly communally charged district, right? So it moved from that to friendships between Muslim and Hindu students, which was unheard of. It had boys saying, if my sister doesn't get to go to school, I will stop going as well, as a way to ensure that sisters don't drop out after 8th standard. And I know I've taken a lot of time, but there are some core components to our social justice education. But a critical piece of that is the education has to enable the receiver or the participant of the education to be able to see themselves as an agent of change and not just a recipient of change. And second, that there is a responsibility on those who hold privilege and who are building these systems to enable access to the tenets of social justice. Yeah, okay. So I will stop here. I know I've gone on forever. But I want to hand over to Nandini and also give the context of Nandini. I've been very inspired by your use of media and storytelling in social justice. I think there's so much power. Like I was reading one article, somewhere where it said, the thing that's worked the most for ocean conservation, if anyone wants to guess, what do you think has worked? Is it the UN? You can take a wild guess in chat. And I promise you will not get the answer. Anyone who wants to take a guess? Children? Okay, so I have one guess. So I'm going to put it in chat. It's the movie Finding Nemo. Because Finding Nemo made people care about the ocean in a way that no UN body. Sorry, my question was, what do you think got people to change their action and engagement with oceans? No law, no treaty, no government campaign, nothing. Finding Nemo changed it. And I wanted to give that example to also highlight just how powerful the work of organizations like Nazaria is. So I'm going to hand it back to you. I'd love to understand from you, what was the thinking behind this? What has it been like? What are some successes? But also, what do you think you need from others, in this ecosystem to change this? Yeah. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vandita, for giving us like a glimpse into what I know is just like, many, many years of, rigorous, deep, critical work in social justice. And I think what is also just standing out to me more than anything is what you said about community and the whole idea of like rooting ourselves away from, I guess, the minute we go back into like individual like stories or individual like success trajectories, we also fall back into that same capitalist idea that there's going to be one single savior who's going to completely uplift and transform their community, when actually it takes a village and it takes an entire community. And actually, even for individual change makers or activists, we need to rely on our community. So I think that's just like such a powerful takeaway. And the other is just how genuinely intersectional and interdisciplinary your approach is, because climate, education, gender, health, all of these things are inextricably linked. And I think it's so powerful when we approach social justice through that like holistic lens. So yeah, moving on, I'll share a little bit about Nazaria. And I think, Vandita has already pointed out that Nazaria's work in many ways intersects between media and social justice. The why and the how of that is something that I'm hoping to convey, and then really excited to also launch into a conversation, a Q&A, where we can, unpack it more. But for the sake of not doing a disservice to our ethos, which is nothing about us without us is for us, which is a slogan that many social justice movements rightfully have claimed and used, I thought the best way to start off is not with me, but actually through a rap video that a bunch of our Nazaria youth artists created close to 3 years ago now, when we first started Nazaria. So actually, I need to make sure I'm sharing my audio, because this always becomes, okay, share sound, cool. It's just a 2-minute video. Can everyone see my screen? Everyone just thumbs up? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't know if it's just me, but
Yeah, it's yeah, we are not able to see it play.
Like you can hear it, but you can't see it.
Yeah, we can't see.
Okay, let's try
We reshare. Yeah.
again. Sorry, just a second. Sorry, that's so odd. Is this better? Can you see it now?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can hear it too. I'm just going to quickly test.
Yeah. Good.
Awesome. Okay. There's always got to be some tech issue in every online call. Okay, I'm playing it now.
So Nandini, when you go full screen, it stops sharing for us. So maybe don't go full screen.
Right now?
Yeah, this is fine.
सुनो हमारी बात,
देखो हमारा नजरिया, चल चल मुझे बोलना, आगे बढ़ने दे तू मुझे रोकना, अपने बस्ती का हीरा मुझे टोकना, आगे बढ़ने दे तू मुझे रोकना, अपने बस्ती का हीरा मुझे टोकना। यादें भी तेरी खोना था, इस बस्ती से निकला एक सोना था, मत दो हम लोगों को एडवाइस, हम पूरी कर लेंगे अपनी ख्वाहिश, मेहनत करके हम तो फंस गए, देखो बिल्डिंग वाले कैसे आगे बढ़ गए, टैलेंट तो है हम सब में, पर पूरे नहीं हो रहे सपने, बातें हमारी ऐसी कट्टर, जैसे पिच पे बुमराह की यॉर्कर, आगे बढ़ने दे तू मुझे रोकना, अपने बस्ती का हीरा मुझे टोकना, आगे बढ़ने दे तू मुझे रोकना, अपने बस्ती का हीरा मुझे टोकना।
Okay, so I would love to show the full video, but that may eat too much into our time. So I'm gonna share the link in our chat so that folks can, watch it along with other, media content that we have online. But yeah, I thought that I could just start off with that because just for some context, these boys were at the time in grade 9, some of whom were at risk of dropping out. Some actually went on to drop out of school. Some went on to even be early offenders. But I think what that experience working with them showed us is that young people have a voice, and while they maybe aren't able to thrive in some systems and some institutions, in alternative spaces they can. And so we, as a collective of media makers, filmmakers, were interested to see how media could kind of be a tool or a catalyzer to enable young people to find their voice, to speak up for what they care about, and through that to yeah, like move towards economic mobility, but also just personal transformation. Um, and so if I had to go macro, this is the state of Indian media today. 90% of leadership positions in Indian media are occupied by upper caste groups, and there's close to no representation of caste marginalized communities and very little representation of men.
Nandini, so sorry, you're not able to see your screen, the presentation.
Oh,
Maybe just reshare it. Yeah.
okay, I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry.
Part of the experience.
Are you able to see my screen now?
Not yet.
It's blank.
Still blank?
Yeah. If you
Okay.
want to just share the link with me as you talk, then I can just.
It's
Yeah.
showing now.
Now it's showing?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I guess based on this reality, we were interested to think about what would it take to start to challenge the current status quo in Indian media, and through that, how would that ultimately enable social, transformation? And so I guess that's kind of like the reason why we exist, because we believe that issues of representation and voice are intrinsically linked to issues of social justice. That if marginalized communities are not able to have their voices heard, their needs will continue to be, silenced and overlooked. And ultimately, it's only through visibilizing and giving space to marginalized communities that we can actually even understand what change means, and what change looks like and means to them.
Nandini, so sorry. Maybe don't share full screen. You can just go slide by slide on the presentation. I think when you're going full screen, it's not sharing.
Could I maybe just send you the link then?
Yes, you can.
Make it easier.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that, folks. This is one more reason why I'm learning I should be using Chrome and not Safari. Like 20 people have told me that. I've just refused to listen to them. Just let me know if you're able to open it up.
Yeah.
I'm going to post this in the chat though, because I feel like it might be something folks may have already read or heard somewhere, and you may want to, hold on to it. Would someone like to come off mute and maybe read out what's written in the chat bot?
I can go.
Thanks, Ben.
If you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, so sorry, I couldn't see that. I'll read it again. If you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together.
Yeah, and this is a really powerful statement by this incredible visual artist and activist, Ella Watson, who comes from an Indigenous community in Australia. And I think what she's really getting at is the fact that, the work of social justice cannot happen and cannot be led by the oppressors. It must be led by communities. And that was always and has been our approach at Nazaria, that if we do want to challenge and shift the media landscape, then it is not us, but ultimately young people and marginalized communities who are subjected to these realities, right? So ultimately, Nazaria's bold vision is we dream of an India where marginalized youth can emerge as socially conscious storytellers who go on to reclaim narratives in mainstream media. And so in many ways, we think of this work as work of reclamation. We can move on to the next slide. Our theory of change, in a very simple way, looks somewhat like this. The first objective is that we are striving to mainstream media literacy in schools so that young people start to think about the media that they consume, the narratives that they have bought into, the difference between what's authentic and trustworthy news and what's hate-driven, agenda-driven narratives. So for them to build critical thinking from a young age. The next is we work with creatively inclined youth, again, from marginalized communities, and provide them high quality civic media training. So we have a social justice curriculum and a media curriculum that they engage with simultaneously, through which they go on to create media for change. One example of which was the rap video that you saw. And then finally, we also recognize that social mobility in many ways also rests upon economic mobility. And so we create avenues and platforms for our youth graduates to gain access to the creative industry, so that they do have a pathway to kind of enter the industry. So this is just a glimpse into what our social justice framework essentially entails. It's built off 4 pillars: Pehchan, identity, Awaz, voice, Nazaria, perspective, and Badlav, social change. So our curriculum rests on these 4 pillars. And through our curriculum, we are basically striving to enable young people to, A, first, just express themselves wholly and truthfully. Second, to build a greater sense of voice and agency, both in the media that they create, but then also through that, take those skills into their everyday lives and be able to advocate for themselves on the day-to-day. And then, yeah, finally, for them also to build a greater sense of first self and then social consciousness. Know not just who they are in terms of their likes and dislikes, but also their intersecting identities and what does that mean for them in the world that they're in. Yeah, and so Yazdan is one of our youth artists who's been with us for 3 years. He's graduating from Nazaria in March next year. He was a backbencher. He was one of the youth artists who wrote the rap video that you saw today. And now he's working on, short documentaries that are addressing really critical issues in his community. Currently, he's working on a short documentary around residents who were promised redevelopment and then were scammed and now have, indefinitely over the past many years been waiting for justice. So he's in many ways first found his identity, Pehchan, through Nazaria, and now he's using his voice to advocate for things that affect him and his community. And then another example of a youth artist I wanted to give is Ikra. When she started off with us 3 years ago, she really hesitated to express herself. First, I think she kind of found her own, creative voice. And then she started to think about how she could represent herself, because I think her often some things she'd bring up is that I don't see people like me in media. And so then she went on to write and direct a short film called Hijabi Hacker that, just for her is trying to shape the way in which we think about a Muslim girl in a basti. Can she also be a change maker? And can she also start to redefine, what and who a Muslim woman is like? So, yeah, I think we can skip this. Ultimately, I think just to wrap this up, I'd say that in many ways our pedagogy and our philosophy at Nazaria is rooted in this, that education is not neutral. It's either an instrument of conformity or freedom. And so inherently, whether you call your curriculum social justice or not, if you are working towards building these values, constitutional values, in your classroom or through grassroots work, then that is the work of social justice education. And so I just a nudge to move beyond the tags and just really think about, if it's not neutral, then what is it? And so with that, I'll basically wrap up. And I would, just love to now, Vandita, have us, chat in more depth about, why a social justice curriculum, right? What are young people and children in our country today learning in schools? And is it enough? Is it really building the kind of citizenship that we need today?
Nandini, that was really something, and I've saved the links to be able to access later. I'm going to pick off from the last quote that you had, right? The power of education to be either a space of freedom or of more oppression. And linked to that is an increasing trend because of the citizen question. There's this increasing trend of commodification of education, where education is not education for the sake of it or for the sake of learning or the joy of learning, but it's become a commodity you exchange for fees. And I know this goes a little like perhaps into the economics and politics of it, but when you do that, what you're doing is you're pushing people to only think about education as something for next. It's never about education in the present moment, right? So I was thinking of about three things. Like when you think of education as a commodity, you never think of the present moment. And then what ends up happening is your education shapes the individual, the child, to become very hyper individualistic in their focus, in how they learn, in how they behave. And you see that not just with education outcomes, you see that with heightened rates of bullying, of ragging, of suicides. And this is quite dominant, like it's predominant across high income, low income, middle income schools and neighborhoods. In low income schools, of course, then there's an element of caste, an element of religion. In high income schools, there's an added element of class as well. A lot of these elements come in gender, sexuality. But essentially, what it's doing is it's making us so individualistic in our approach that we are not able to think about community or the other. And that for me is an integral part of being a citizen, right? I think being a citizen or being a part of any community is knowing that there is an exchange of rights and an exchange of freedoms and an exchange of maybe today I will give this up because the other person needs it more. And tomorrow I will also think about how do I expand the pie so both them and I can have it without one of us having to give it up. So I think that's where our schools are failing. I think one is, of course, the curriculum, and I will come to that. But culturally, we are not creating an environment within which we are embedding in our children the basic values you require to be a good person, like a citizen, etc. is different because sometimes I think being a good person or a responsible person is more important than being a responsible citizen. So sometimes you have to act against that as well, right? So I think I will start with that. I think in addition to that, the curriculum always tends to do an add-on. A lot of programs are like, okay, we're already studying this. Why don't you also study social emotional learning? Why don't you also study about your rights? Why don't you also study about gender? But where is the mainstreaming of social justice in our curriculum, where these are not thought of as an add-on? Because when things are thought of as an add-on, and I'll give one example of how it manifests later on in life is in STEM education, if the concept of, if understanding caste or gender is always an add-on, then it becomes an option that you can choose to not think about. And when that happens, when you design for like including different castes or different religions, you feel like you're doing something extra. But if it was mainstream, then that would just be your default. Right? So we've also struggled for a long time where we said, okay, our ultimate goal is to introduce social justice curriculums in schools. And then 3 years in, we said that's such a terrible idea because we need social justice to be mainstreamed. From your physical education class, does it understand the needs of kids with disabilities? To a class on mathematics, to a class on like physics, where are the women? Do you name the women? Where are your history stories? Do you name people from Dalit communities who were instrumental in shaping your country's freedom? So I think that mainstreaming is really missing. And when we work directly with schools, a big part of our push is that. And a big part of our push is to work with the kids and say, demand this. These are your schools, these are your rights. And we work with the teachers and with the, I don't know what to call it, but like the admin infrastructure to say, have you thought about mainstreaming rather than even bringing us in for a program? Because like continued expansion of One Future Collective is not something we want. We want to be increasingly redundant, right? And that requires other people to take this up without us. What we can offer is systems and toolkits and modules and open access ways to do it, which we've been doing more and more by documenting it. So I think that's where the citizen question lands for me. I think there's a lot to do with culture, with infra, And I'm not going too much, but even down to like your school uniform, the way the school building is built, there's a lot there. And I know we were also thinking of the circle program from the lens of a feminist school, and to think about what does that mean in terms of power relations between a teacher and a student. What is the role of shame? What is the role of a student in terms of their own agency and rights? And do we see children as holders of agency and rights? Because I feel like it gets taken away like this in school systems. And when you teach a child that it can be taken away from you so easily, how does that translate to when they're an adult and they have the power to take it away? So that's what I think of how schools should raise children, but also a little bit about how we work with schools and educational institutions, increasingly to make ourselves irrelevant. So we transfer whatever knowledge we can. We do a lot of advocacy to say, why don't you change this and make it like this? And hopefully more policy advocacy as well. We have been more successful with policy advocacy at the regional and global level, especially with UN systems on gender transformative and feminist approaches to education. Not yet with India, but there's a long way to go. But Nandini, I'd love to hear from you as well. I think especially because when I was in school, media was just, I'm 30 now. I feel like that age and the Gen Z part has really come in is, it just wasn't a part of it. Like nobody ever said, oh, you could make a documentary or you could make music. And that could be a way to like inspire and connect. But now that is everyone's reality. Even the program we did in Navalgarh, the one I was referring to, everyone was using TikTok. Like that's what they want to share their stories on. They don't want to make a presentation for class. So what does that mean for you in your context and how you think schools can do differently?
Thank you so much for starting us off. Just like wanna double down on what you shared about not approaching social justice education as this add-on, but recognizing that like it ought to be like deeply integrated into every like system and every aspect of how we think about like education in our schools. And yeah, I think one thing I've thought about a lot is how schools in many ways are like a reflection of the society and the country and the world that we're in, right? And often schools which are supposed to and potentially are promised to be sites of social mobility or economic mobility or liberation often end up reproducing the same violences that they were designed to free us from, right? And it's a larger question of were schools really designed to free us of that? But even if we were to, I did the Teach for India fellowship, and I came in believing that like it is through this that ultimately the students that I work with will go on to be on a different life track potentially if we put enough effort and love and excellence into their learning. But then looking around at like the infrastructure and the realities of the system and realizing, but there's so much of discrimination and shame and violence and fear. I sometimes used to feel, I remember I used to have this small journal, and I was a grade 10 teacher, and I was sitting for the 10th time with my children as they were doing like one of their rounds of their prelim examinations, mindlessly just like writing, just memorize lines of things or like copying, cheating from notes written under their table, and just writing, this feels like jail. It feels like jail for me, and it feels like jail for them. Like, is this really school? And so I think we totally like agree with you. We need to fundamentally like rethink when we say social justice education, what are we really talking about? And it's exactly what you're saying. It's rethinking the way schools are designed. It's rethinking uniforms. It's rethinking power relations. And I think what I love about what you folks do is also not just focusing on folks who are subjected to these marginalizations, but also people in power who are either maintaining the status quo or perpetuating it. And ultimately, I think we need, the push from both bottom up and top bottom to start to shift things. And when I think about a work at Nazaria and how we've thought about media, people often ask me like, we get social justice, but like why media? It's this like niche thing that only creative or media inclined kids will want to do. But like one of two parents in India, based on this recent study, mentioned that their children are addicted to their phones, right? Like on an average, children are spending 5 to 6 hours on their phones. Think about how much time they're spending sleeping, how much time they're spending at school. They're spending as much, if not more time on their screens, right? So to realize that media is not this, again, it's add on, it's actually important because it's important to kids, right? We're not introducing something to be like, ye bhi seekho, but it's like, this is actually what they care about. And can we leverage what they care about and what's actually dramatically affecting their aspirations, their socio-emotional well-being, their mental health? Can we leverage that and enable them to build a safer and more meaningful relationship with media, and then also start to question what narratives they're buying into, right? And so I think that's kind of where media fits in. We see it in many ways like one of the many tools we can be using with our children to start conversations around social justice. And so, I mean, I would love to know from you, like, I think for us, media is one of those tools. I know you mentioned both at a policy level, through programs, through fellowships, you're utilizing different strategies to drive this mission. But if you could maybe give us, one or two more examples that could maybe even be applicable, since we have many teachers on this call. Like, how do we start? Like, how do we start to do that deep work of bringing social justice into the conversation, not as an add-on, but as something that needs to be mainstreamed?
Thank you for that, Nandini. And as you could see, I was making so many notes because it was so powerful for me when you shared that bit about how doing this is also a way for kids to have a better relationship with media. And that's something that's so lost because of the digital addiction that generally is prevailing right now. So really, thank you for that. I will start by saying one thing is that schools won't do everything. Like, these are often systems run by people with the oppressor identities, right? They're meant to produce workers. They're meant to produce labor. They will not necessarily always be sites of emancipation. It's up to us as to how we design it, how we change it, but also to create alternative systems. And I think that's maybe something where I'll come to educators and say, it's such a tiny thing, but are you able to accept a child in your classroom saying no? Right? It's the tiniest thing. And no, I don't want to do it. No, I don't want to study today. No, I don't want to participate in this. No, I don't want to dance. It makes me not feel good, or I don't want to play a sport. These are such simple acts of a child asserting that they know who they are. And is there a way for you to engage with their knowledge of who they are and maybe even encourage them to explore without telling them who they are? And I feel like that's a really, really tiny change. That's one. Second is, I think there are so many learned scripts that all of us have, which we invariably default to when we're teaching, right? These are scripts that come up in examples. These are scripts that come up like even in how you might gender your classroom. Like, if you're teachers and you're on this call, I can ask you this one question is, do you think the girl children in your classroom are more responsible? I'll wait for some people to say yes or no, or maybe. Do you feel the girls are just better behaved? They listen to you?
Yes.
Yes. But that's a script, right? That's also me being taught as a girl child that I have to behave. I am not allowed to be as reckless, as fearless, as adventurous, as daring, and sometimes as rude and, ill-behaved, all of that, as a male child is. And I think unlearning and being open to your social scripts being challenged, I think that's really important. And I know these are very minor things because I also want to give practical advice that an educator can take back to their classroom without further investment of money. Like, I'm not going to say change your classroom, bring new seats, change the uniform. All of things that cost budgets and money are difficult to do, right? Yes, I think Shiparna, you put it so beautifully. It's a hidden curriculum in schools. Like, it's stuff we are never writing down. And what you don't articulate formally, you never even challenge, because no one challenges that, because nobody has asked you to challenge it. So I think for educators, here are two things. Learn to listen to a no and listen to what that no is signaling to you as an educator. Do not force your wishes onto a child. And second would be unlearn your own social scripts. Allow for children to show you who they are rather than be like, oh, girl children are supposed to be like this. Or children who, I give you like children who have 4 piercings in their ears are like this. Or a child who has colored hair is like this, right? Like small examples, but I think this can really move the needle. Yeah. What do you think, Nandini?
Absolutely. I think as you were sharing, I was just thinking that, ultimately it's not even about what you're teaching. It's not about introducing gender studies and climate. Of course, that should be in your curriculum, but again, in a way that it's interwoven. And more than anything, it's about how we teach. We do this exercise both with the youth we work with and also when we've done, educator trainings. And actually, our youth artists lead those trainings. And it's just simple questions like, what identities do I hold? And what identities are heard in the world, what identities are not. Do I feel heard, do I not? And I think just asking ourselves those tough questions, that I've actually noticed adults find it so much harder and I feel so much more discomfort engaging with those questions, and sometimes even young people, because I think in order for us to even start to shift something in our classrooms or with the children we work with, or even with leadership or people in power, we have to first inquire about our own intersecting privileges and marginalities. And I think then it's also easier for us to like start to think about giving and taking and sharing space. I mean, whose voice really needs to be heard? Like, are we even the folks who should be having this conversation? Maybe actually one of your, One Future Collective fellows, one of our youth artists should actually be having this conversation. And I think we'd all learn so much more through it. So I even just think about, like, are we also willing and able to ask ourselves those tough questions, and also recognize that, I mean, I know given my intersecting identities, as you said, you hope One Future Collective to be redundant. I hope that I and our team of, as of now, highly privileged folks become redundant, and this movement is ultimately led by the young people we work with, because it is their revolution and it is their movement. And I think it's important to constantly also decenter ourselves, or else we fall into that same saviorist narrative. So I guess that also was on my mind in thinking about what's the first step of building a social justice curriculum. I would say just like stop and reflect, and take it from there and ask, should we be building it alone, or does this have to be done in collaboration and community? Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is the right moment to open it up, but Vandita, do you have any other thoughts around social justice curriculum, or do you think we should kind of start engaging with folks in the room?
Thanks, Nandini. I will just add one thing, which is to say what I've learned from social justice work is, as you work with the older population, even 16 and onwards, people have communities that are often linked to their identity and their politics. And it's really difficult to ask them to change their politics without providing them an alternative community, because it's isolating, it's difficult, and it's lonely, and they will not stick with it. So it's a very like soft part of doing social justice work, but it's incredibly important to sustain it beyond your engagement. So yeah, I will just say that, but I know that there are questions in chat as well, so I will pause here.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, both of you. I think I just have a lot of thoughts that I'm also trying to collect right now, but I know there were a few questions that came in the chat, and I also just want to open up the floor. You can unmute yourselves. If a question or a thought is coming up, feel free to voice it out. I think we had a question of from Priya around, can we teach social justice without actually preaching it, or is it required to do so? Priya, do you want to maybe elaborate the question a little bit? Where is that coming from? If you're still here, that'd be great.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
Not anymore for me.
Yeah, can't hear you, Priya. No worries. Okay. I maybe some tech issues there. Nandini, Vandita, anything to add on to that question? If anything's coming up.
I'm happy to start, and then Vandita, I'd love to hear what you think on this. I think that's often something that, like, the shadow that comes with some of this work, that it can sometimes feel like moral policing or preaching, and I think that's often how it's very easy to reject this. Like, oh, this is just like these radicals like protesting and like just constantly preaching. And I think part of also mainstreaming is to make it more inclusive, so folks don't get, like just like, yeah, scared away from engaging, especially if they come with some of those initial biases or like ideas of what a social justice curriculum or lens entails. I think the one thing I'll say is like a stance on orientation we naturally gravitated towards when we were developing our social justice curriculum and pedagogy was to not actually root it in any kind of statements. Like we're not like at the end of this session, every child will learn about power relations. Sure, like that could be kind of the orientation, but actually most of even our workbooks are built of questions. We ask questions, we leave a lot of space for exploration. And then that's also where art and storytelling becomes really powerful because it allows people to make meaning of or to engage with these topics based on their own lived experience and what matters to them. So when we talk about like gender, I think it's if we start to already bring in this narrative that makes boys, thinking about in a school context, boys feel like marginalized or feel like, their identities are not being seen, we've immediately lost them. And so I think instead to have more an open-ended approach, I think enables folks across the spectrum, whether they are, of marginalized identities or not, to engage in a way that actually like leads to like honest reflection and dialogue versus, yeah, just getting into these silos where people aren't able to talk to each other. So I guess that was kind of our stance, and also to not drive a political agenda. And we've often been very conscious of that, that even if a young person we work with says something that we may disagree with or doesn't align with our politics, to not use it as a moment to be like, no, but that's bigotry. Even if a boy says, oh, I feel like girls are more preferred in this class, you give them more opportunities, our response is not like, oh, well, you have like faced like generational like privilege, now deal with it. Like that's not like helpful for anyone. So I think to always root ourselves in humility and curiosity has been helpful. But Vandita, I'd love to hear from you, your thoughts on this.
Thanks for sharing that, Nandini. And also, Priya, thanks for expanding that in chat. So I will say a couple of things. I think for us, in terms of how we look at programs and in terms of impact, we do look at learning questions, but we have like a multi-layered impact that we hope this creates. There are 3 layers to it. One would be inner growth, which is, does this lead to a higher sense of agency, dignity, ability to use your voice? Even something like, are you more confident in, taking the stage when you weren't earlier? Second would be identifying what is your style of change making and what are the micro communities you want to influence. And then how able are you to take action in those communities? Because we don't want education to get limited to awareness. And then third is, are we able to provide a political home that enables these leaders and change makers to access the critical resources and people required to be able to show up for the change work, right? So I think that's our layers of impact. To answer the question from this lens, and I will speak from who I am, and maybe some OFC models will also go a little 10% here or there. I don't believe facilitation or education is neutral. I think to come into a classroom with the belief that an educator is neutral is to sometimes hide the biases and the opinions that we hold, right? I would rather that educators and us as facilitators or teachers or curriculum designers come into the space with the knowledge of who we are. That's one. And second, for me, is there are some common non-negotiables to social justice, right? It is not okay to say someone should be murdered because of their caste, or it's not okay to say kids should not share meals with this one kid who's Muslim. And these are real challenges that have come up. But in how we address this, I strongly resonate with what Nandini shared. I think there is too much of an impetus or pressure of perfection, which is one, absolutely not possible, and second, does not lend to the cause. If I, as a teacher, facilitator, person holding space, say what, Nandini said, oh, you shouldn't have said this, is bigotry, something like that, it's going to lead to shame or anger or resentment. And it's not actually going to lead to any learning. So I will say that, yes, there is, okay, this is your common bare minimum, right? There are some injustices that we have to plant the seeds of, but the how cannot be, how dare you, or labeling the person or shaming the person. What I have found most effective is, how do you create a space where people feel safe enough and brave enough to challenge each other and have these conversations themselves. For me, one of our most transformational experiences was when one of the girls in one of the classrooms that we were working with themselves, like one by one, the girls started talking about, like, sure, you have it tough, but these are the things we're facing. And how can we hold space for both your problems and ours, right? Like with seventh standard boys saying, I feel so much pressure. In 5 years, I have to get married. I'm supposed to make money. How does that happen? Right. And at the same time, women saying, I want to study. I'm not being allowed to because. So there are these competing tensions in the room. Of course, some tensions lead to much more violence and negative life outcomes. But what is our role to facilitate that tension between the stakeholders in the room rather than take that tension on ourselves? At the same time, how do we build guardrails and safeguards to ensure that it does not escalate into a situation which causes violence? So I will also say that because in a lot of our classrooms that we've worked with, there are Dalit kids, there are Muslim kids, and there is violence. There is active, real, harmful violence leading to death that happens within the classroom and also in after class, after school spaces. So it's also our responsibility to temper that. Yeah.
Yes, I 100% echo that. And I think it's what you just shared about brave spaces is so important because I feel like that's actually we go like one step further to be like, can we actually have uncomfortable conversations? And I also think, which I think many educators probably already do, is having a certain set of values and norms that you anchor yourself in. So when things do come up, you have those values of mutual respect and inquiry. So it allows you to like navigate those difficult conversations with some predefined, cultural norms. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you for that. Both. That was very provoking. I So there is a question. There was this question by Sujan, if I'm not sorry if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. I think that was largely around financial sustainability and the external stakeholders that become a part of your program. Specifically, is talking about CSR, and if we believe that an alternate system can never be offered by oppressors, isn't it wrong to enable the idea of CSR, as the problem of class difference starts from there, along with enabling business leaders to grow their practices? What other options do we have for sustaining social justice? And I think this is, as founders, maybe this is an ethical navigation that happens for you. Is there anything to add there uh, as well?
Do you want me to take it first? Yeah. So I have a very short answer to say you're right. It's difficult, it's wrong, but I don't know what the alternatives are. It's not just CSR. Foundations are run on private money that people make by not paying their taxes or by extracting labor. Like if you go into the Marxist theory of like, surplus value of labor. So I don't think beyond a certain point there is money that is not made ethically, right? You can never be an ethical billionaire. So at the crux of it, yes, philanthropy does play a role, in my opinion, and based in research on taking away the teeth of movements. Which is why I will also say social justice education is not social justice movements. Social justice education is meant to enable agency, build skills, build community, right? The movement continues, and that's why I spoke about the part of community ensuring sustainability, because the movement has to continue without money. It has to continue as a part of a person's life. Again, why a big part of our programs is do not become a part of the development sector. That's not our ask of you. Maybe some of you will, but what we're looking for is people to be change makers wherever they go. And I think that is a way to mitigate it. Movements have to be citizen powered, people funded. A lot of you might have read this book, but I will recommend it. I think it says the revolution will not be funded. And it's a fantastic book which talks about the need for movements to really build change. Nonprofits are just not going to be able to do that because I am so beholden to my funders reporting that there is an element of this that I cannot do. And the hyper professionalization of nonprofits, increasingly so with corporate crossovers into nonprofit spaces, has also taken away from some of the movement based work that nonprofits have traditionally engaged with. So you're right, but I will distinguish between education and movement. Yeah, Nandini, over to you.
First of all, I know Sujan. Nice to see you. He runs this wonderful initiative called Hum Dekhenge that also works a lot around social justice and community media. So really just lovely to have you in this space. And also thank you for asking such an important, brave question. And yeah, I mean, I would echo everything Vandita shared. I'm also, as a disclaimer, a very young founder. So even I haven't defined all the funding sources, but I think this is a tension I often think about that. And sometimes trying to like sustain what a conventional nonprofit is in our world today can be a very de-radicalizing act. And it can ultimately like shed away, the actual like reason why one exists. I also think it is about and also think about this with movements is that it is about maneuvering and knowing how to navigate. And I think if we can like hold the difficult truths and also hold what's at stake, also define what our non-negotiables are, then maybe the non-negotiable is I will not take CSR funding, but I will take this. Or if I am taking funding, then I'm going to ask these questions. I think having a very clear idea of what your values are that you're leading with, I think allows us to make those negotiations along the way. And more, at least I'm starting to find a lot of value in thinking about, as you said, what does it mean to be self-sustaining, and to recognize that the only way to do important work or socially conscious work, social justice work, is not only through like a non-profit model, that there are other ways of actually being compensated for the vital necessary work that you are doing, and finding ways to build some of those avenues of revenue generation. So I think I think it's important to explore alternative ways, because it's true the way we're currently running the social sector is extremely de-radicalizing, and actually often basically enables power systems and structures to be maintained. And that is something that even I'm constantly like quite unsettled by.
Thank you. Thanks for that, both. I think that was uh, it was a vulnerable question. I really appreciate that both of you could answer that with such honesty. I think I just want to maybe shift gears, and before we close out with Navedita's question, um, I also wanted to just see if you would be able to provide us an example of what a learning space looks like for both of you when you are specifically trying to. I know Nandini, for the creation of media and the work that young people and youth artists do, there is also facilitation, right? You do work with them. There are interventions that help them learn around about certain topics. Of course, there is the technicalities of making media, but there is also facilitation around sensitive topics and helping them really understand what matters to them. And also, Vandita, you do work with young people and communities and have interventions that requires a learning space. If you both were to give an example of what that looks like, what is the learners or the young person's experience, I think hopefully that helps us get an outline of that or how that looks like as well. Vandita,
Go for it. Yeah.
would you want to start us off?
Okay, I could. Yeah, this question really got me thinking because it's so different. So I'll start, I think, by first saying that it's very contextualized. It's contextualized to the needs of the people who will be engaging with us. Sometimes it's participatory, sometimes it's co-designed. It really depends on what people are open to, what there is space for. The nature of that learning space can look really, really different. It could be offline, hybrid, online. It can be in a classroom. It can be in an open space. So I think the physical space also can look really different. And then with that space, the modalities of what we're using ends up looking very different as well. What I can say is that we take an approach to learning, which is theory plus action. So a lot of our learning, while grounded in knowledge systems, theory, etc., is not necessarily built only on that. It's often quite action built. And then there's a retrospective learning that is harvested and gathered from it. We find that it stays with people much longer. We do try to balance between learning that is lived experience oriented and learning that is also, from existing theory, larger sets of evidence and data, that sort of thing. So I think a couple of those things there. We have increasingly built a model where people who have experienced our learning are now facilitators of that learning ahead. And we actually have a national and expanding global facilitator network, which is built entirely for alumni. And here we do try to compensate them. And I feel like that's what also creates a partly paid forward and a partly like compensated model, ensuring equitable access to facilitation as well. And that's really transformed this because it's moved beyond us with some of our core pedagogy, core methodologies in place. Yeah, so I think I will stop there because I can only think of like 50 classrooms at the same time or 50 rooms at the same time. But they're very rooted in play. They're very rooted in action, in people doing something. A key component of behavioral change also is often action. Awareness doesn't move a person as much as taking action does. And the third is building community. So building a space in that room, whatever that room might be, where people feel a heightened sense of responsibility to start with towards each other. So these are some core things that I can think of. But Nandini, over to you.
Very helpful. Nandini?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So we mostly follow like again deeply very contextualized. We run programs in rural villages with Dalit communities. We run programs with youth in Bombay. We do school-based programs. So really depending on where we're at and what we're doing with whom, I think we deeply like shift both our pedagogical approaches, but also like the content that we're creating. But just in terms of like the learner's experience, let's say like in a 60 to 90-minute space, it often starts with like a spark, followed by like an exploration. So to dig deeper into a given topic. For example, we have this summer film program called Reimagine that weaves together futures thinking with narrative fiction filmmaking. And that day we were in one of the sessions, we were kind of exploring like gender roles. And so we read out, a story which didn't mention names of the characters, but mentioned their professions, and saw how many, young people thought the nurse was a woman and the doctor was a man, and, so on and so forth. That would be like the spark. And then we basically ask a couple of questions for them to think about how gender roles unfold in their own lives, in their own homes. So there will be like an exploration followed by a discussion. The discussion is where they're probably challenging each other's ideas, followed by then a reflection where they're like journaling for a few minutes on what are their takeaways, what do they want to think more about. And then we kind of move into creation. And then that's where we bring in storytelling, where they then go on to say, okay, now you have to make a skit where you wake up one day and your mother is your father and your father is your mother, and go on to enact what a day in their life looks like. And then groups and in teams, they kind of work together to create that. They reflect on it, and then over time, that, for example, then emerged into one of like the short films our youth made at the end of the program, right? And so in many ways, we kind of try to take them through different loops of that journey. It can look very different based on the topic, but yeah, that's kind of a sneak into that experience for a learner.
Thank you so much for that. I think that was really helpful. I know we're coming to a close, and to everyone who put in questions that couldn't get answered, we're so sorry, but Nandini and Vandita have put down their email addresses, so you can reach out to them and also go on and visit their website. I think I just want to close with a part of Navedita's question, which is what really drives you to keep doing the work of raising change makers or working with communities to be agents of change, and what will keep enduring you to do this work over and beyond.
Why don't you take it first, Nandini?
The question is what inspires, or like what drives us, right? In a lot of honesty, I think I started this, like the work of Nazaria specifically, from a place of like reflection followed by guilt. And I don't think guilt is a helpful emotion at all, but that in all honesty is what made me start the work, when I realized that I, as a documentary filmmaker, was in many ways being extractive, in while the agenda was to tell important stories of communities. In many ways it was just like, yeah, just once again kind of driving my narrative, and having communities kind of just be the subject of my story. And I think I realized that I don't want to be that filmmaker. Instead, I want to create spaces where they can create their own stories in their own voices and on their own terms. And so I think it started from a place of guilt, the initial impetus. But I think over time I've realized more and more that this work is not at all about impact. I'm saying this because I feel like this is a safe space. I actually really dislike the word impact. I think of this work as mutual transformation. I think me and everyone in our collective shows up because we are genuinely constantly learning and transforming and becoming, better human beings while engaging with the young people and women that we do. Like, they blow my mind every day. The stories they come up with challenge the things I think. They call me out, they make me aware of my privilege. And I just think overall, I think there's so much of shedding and growing that I experience in their presence, that it just makes life so much more enriching. So it's a deeply selfish decision to do this work, because I don't think anything else would make me grow in the way that this does. Yeah,
Thank you for
that's
that.
the honest answer.
Yeah, Vandita.
That's beautiful, Nandini. I think I started from a place of like having had certain experiences, feeling like this, it needed to be corrected both for myself and then for others. I think the idea of, oh, I don't want another young person to go through this, but I really resonate with what Nandini shared. Like, guilt isn't a great place, but I feel like this wasn't a great place for me to start as well. I think it leads to so much burnout, sometimes so much resentment also, because nothing really changes at the pace you want it to change. A lot of the ethical questions raised in chat, right, around fundraising, etc., it's just tough. I think what's really led me to stay here is I don't, and maybe that's what it is, right? It is selfish. I don't know anything else that I will wake up for every morning and feel like this makes sense. Like, this is something that I should spend my day doing. So I think at some point it stops being about, you start, maybe, at least I started with impact, changing how things were for me, for nobody else. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. I think long back, I realized that a lot of it is just not possible. But I know that the small pockets of community that I'm able to build and create, and that are created for me, really help me, I think, escape maybe everyday life and imagine the possibility of another future, and to see that other future really play out in front of my eyes. So I think being able to catch pockets and glimpses of that is really, really special for me. So it is very selfish. It gives me a lot of hope, a lot of courage, and just the feeling that, okay, maybe someday things will be better, for others, for myself, for so many people. Yeah, so I think it's that. I will also say that the development space in general can be quite difficult to be in. But I see so many people just showing up constantly in really difficult situations, whatever their personal cost. So I think that also is a source of strength that sometimes I feel like I fail to acknowledge. But just knowing that there are others in the same mess as you, or others who are trying to figure out the same stuff as you, and being so generous while they figure it out, is really, really a big source of inspiration and strength for me.
Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time and just giving us so much in such a short amount of time. I'm really grateful to you and for everyone else who joined in and asked their questions and really engaged and really listened. I really appreciate that. There's a small poll on your screen. If you could just respond to that on your way out, that would be great. Nandini, Vandita, thank you so much for this. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all the wonderful work that you do. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you. Thanks, Randita.
Thanks, everyone.